This is, they're actually approving it for the events. They're gonna say, pending to give you approval. You will be done after this.
I'm Katie.
All right, well, that was an easy decision. Took time.
No, I've never.
Okay, thank you.
Now you will be done after.
What?
So he gets
So, It's that whole thing the arbors of rock sarcasm.
Yeah.
Oh, God.
Sunday morning. That's really good.
It's around.
Yeah.
We're all trying to figure out how to vote. I like to love Hey, Sean. I'm trying to figure out how to. Yeah.
If you got some shirts.
Yeah. Actually, Norman's like, this is all. You guys even threw salt out, kind of ruined this. Right, and you're better off. We got a bunch. I got a big pile of it. Actually, I'm here. I'm looking for references online for the news. But I just do the cash. Is it?
Well, those guys did help you out.
Yeah, they do.
This is my
Right. I just can't get outside now.
Hey, how are you? Tell me to go around the corner the next time.
Get right here.
Because I've been to 20 of them, and I haven't been in all of them.
Just started.
All right.
Nobody likes it. Does anybody like it? I don't know how many watched last one, but I'm starting to feel lonely.
I know.
First time you'll be able to see me.
We kind of blocked.
Yeah, no.
One minute you sound like you're from a country, grandpa, the next minute you sound like you're from the city or.
Well, always a heat. So we look at
All right, pledge allegiance. Pledge allegiance.
To the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to city's board meeting.
please do the roll call.
Mayor Flower,
Here.
Alderman Berry.
Here.
Murray. Here. Kiefer.
Here.
Screen. Here. Stern.
Here.
Allen.
No, here.
All right, do we have any comments on the minutes from last week's meeting or a motion on the minutes? I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
I'll second.
Motion and a second, all in favor?
Aye.
I opposed.
Wes wasn't at the meeting, but it's all right.
Hey, let's not call that our.
It's all right, it's all right.
All right, I'm gonna take that as an approved. All right, we've got the guest period now, so this is the time for anybody, if you're not on the agenda, you're not doing a real presentation with what's on our agenda, you're welcome to come up and talk for a couple minutes or tell us what's on your mind, or it's a good time. Anybody have anything for the guest period? Anybody want to talk? This will be the first time I've ever had a meeting where there's nobody that shows up at the guest period. No, that doesn't mean you have to go, Scott. All right. That would be open and close the guest period. It was nice. Now we're on to number 4, which would be the floodway surcharge impact presentation. Basically, I would put this down as I'm going to introduce Karen Frederick from Horner and Schifrin. She's been our the city's flood engineer that we've hired to consult with us on all the things related to flood work as far as levees, stormwater issues. She was real helpful with assessing and coming up with all the helping us with solutions on the stormwater issues we had just this last spring. So we had asked her to come in and give a little bit of a talk and analysis based on Alderman Murray's questions about different flood rules that relate to, particularly it was like flood rises. What happens if you were to take instead of allowing a 1 foot rise in a floodplain to up 1 inch and that type of thing. So with that, I'll let you go and it's flood presentation.
Okay, thank you. You all have a handout here, which I'm going to go through. And so I want to start here with what's on the bottom of this, and it talks about the statement here about floodway being a concept to, it provides a compromise between developing everything in a floodplain and developing nothing. So recognizing that there are interests that need to be balanced, private property rights, and decreasing the risk of flood hazard. And Sean introduced me. A little bit of my background is on the next page. I went to Rolla, got 2 degrees from Rolla, back when it was still Rolla. I've been working for the past 26 years in the water resources industry and the past 20 years at Horner and Schifrin. I'm registered to do engineering work in Missouri and Illinois. I'm a certified floodplain manager. And in the past 20 years, I've done everything from hydraulic modeling for creeks and rivers to revising flood maps through the LOMBR process, done levee design and construction for urban levees in Maryland Heights and Chesterfield. And right now, I have a large clientele for levee district engineering services. On the next page, I wanted to define what a floodplain is and what a floodway is, because sometimes they're used interchangeably. But a floodplain is any land that's susceptible to a flood of an identified return period. Almost always we talk about the 100-year floodplain, because later we'll get in the presentation. That's what FEMA maps, that's what their regulatory jurisdiction is. And that a floodway is really, we map the additional higher risks in a floodway of where there's additional velocity and an additional risk of loss. And so the identification and mapping of a floodway is what needs to be kept clear and free flowing so that there's no cumulative increase in water surface elevation and any enhanced risk for anyone upstream of where these narrow areas are. And then it's important for communities to regulate these areas so that they don't transfer risk to others. The next map is a screenshot of the 3 flood hazard risk areas in the city of Eureka. the large one on the right side of the page, obviously the Merrimack River. And then you have two smaller creeks, Forby on the north, Flat on the south. The next page is a close-up view of Forby Creek. Forby Creek, you can obviously see the high school there, near the center of the page. Everything, all of the buildings are outside of the floodplain, and everything is primarily out of the floodway, except for the field. And really having a non-structure in a floodplain or floodway is an acceptable use, because you don't have a risk of loss there the way you would with the structure.
So just to clarify, the floodway versus the floodplain, the blue part is classified as,
The 100-year floodplain,
and then the striped portion?
floodway. And then the next map, you see Flat Creek. And here you have more risk of loss. On the east side of 109, you can see the treatment lagoon. And you can see properties along Truett Drive that are currently mapped in the 100-year floodplain. On the west side of 109, you see the ball fields. Again, you're practicing a reduction in risk of loss by having a sports venue there. But then you also have Old Town that is subject to flooding.
Just one clarifier there, because a lot of these guys don't have a presentation. If you were looking at Flat Creek, then you'd say that as you kind of go down Flat Creek, there's floodway bordering the creek. And then big items like downtown, are you showing downtown in the 100-year floodplain then?
Yes,
And then you're showing our sewer plant, the 100-year Truett, and then like the ball fields and stuff that were where we do a lot of our ESA. But those are three areas that are actually in the 100-year right now.
yes, thank you,
And the orange portion is 500 here?
yes. So on the next page, we talk about the NFIP. So the NFIP is the National Flood Insurance Program. Communities that participate in this, number one, get their risks mapped. So you get these maps for participating in the NFIP. But it also opens the door for anyone who's in the floodplain to purchase flood insurance. So the community participation is a prerequisite to open that flood insurance market. And any property that has a federally backed loan associated with it has a mandatory purchase requirement. I'm sure you all know, anyone here can buy flood insurance. It just depends on what rate you're gonna pay. If you are not mapped in the flood zone, you're gonna get a preferred rate because you have a low risk of loss. You can buy flood insurance if you're in 500-year floodplain, your rate's gonna be a little higher. And then the rate just keeps climbing, the higher your risk is. So 100-year floodplain, you're gonna have a higher, so 100-year, you're gonna have it even higher.
The
And
more
then
risk,
in the
the more-
floodway, you're gonna have the higher risk of loss. So in the participation in the NFIP is not just a paper chase. As John Boggs can probably attest to, he recently went through a review, which is on the next page. You can see a kind of a handout, and there's a full page of this letter from FEMA that reviews how he is complying with the requirements of the NFIP. So he has to keep records of all of the floodplain permit applications, all as-built. He has to be able to communicate the NFIP to residents, and he has to keep all of these records so that when FEMA comes calling, he's able to demonstrate compliance. And then he gets this glowing letter saying that the city is implementing the program effectively and is in conformance with the requirements of the NFIP. Now, not everyone gets these kind of letters. Some communities get letters where they do not satisfy all of these requirements. Then they're put on probation. They have a few years to comply. If they don't comply, they're suspended. And when they're suspended, the marketplace to the federal insurance is closed. So then you kind of put your residents or people who need flood insurance in a hard way to go. Then on the next page, we talk about development in floodplains versus floodways. Anything that is developed in a floodplain requires a floodplain development permit. And it's primarily a statement by who's ever gonna do the development that they recognize that they're in a floodplain and what their risk is. There's a higher level of demonstration that you know what your risk is when you're developing in a floodway. And you have to submit that an engineering certification saying that your improvements are not going to increase the flood elevation if you're in a floodway. And that's what we call a no-rise. Those are an engineering evaluation. They cost time and money for anyone who is going to develop in a floodway. And then additionally, there are substantial damage and repetitive loss assessments that are required, which I'm going to let John Boggs talk about.
Y'all know me.
Congratulations on the letter.
It is, it's a good one.
Yeah, my very first one was 4 pages long and it was not that nice. It wasn't here.
You're not supposed to say that. Oh, that's right, somewhere else.
Yeah, so basically we have a flood event, we come in, while the water's still up, we do a visual assessment of, how high the water is on the building. And we go from there, we move real fast through town. Once the water recedes, we come back, we do a visual assessment of the inside and outside and inside. Now, NFIP requires everything to be, once you hit 50% of the fair market value of the structure only, then at 50.1%, that structure has to be brought into compliance with National Flood Insurance Program. There's two ways: elevation for residential structures, that's all you can do. Commercial, industrial structures, you can elevate or dry floodproof. The key thing is that 50%. Now, we are 10-year cumulative in our ordinance, which means right now, I'm working off 2009. So if we have an event tomorrow, I go out, I do my assessments, and I come back when the repair permits start coming in. I go back to 2009. Any repairs that people have done to their buildings, that they've got permits for, is counted into that. So it's 10-year cumulative. So you look right now at the 15, 17 events where we had the big stuff downtown, and then plus the 3 flash floods that we had this year, we've got structures now that the next event very well could put them over the threshold. When that happens, it's not a good thing. It's going to cost a lot more money for certain businesses, certain places.
For their insurance?
Their insurance can go up. And what Karen didn't mention is the National Flood Insurance Program right now is in the process of switching over to an actuarial rate. Whereas before everything is just kind of standard, now it's going to be, you've had five events and your rate's going to be this much. It's not, Wes being the insurance, he knows what I'm talking about. So,
But what he means by the cumulative, so once you reach that 50.1%, you don't just get to take the drywall off below 30 inches and re-drywall. You're going to have to demonstrate compliance with either raising your building, your residence, or dry floodproofing a commercial building, which adds cost to whatever your original plan was.
you compound that with somebody that's in the floodway, they actually have to go out, and we have 8 structures right now that are in the floodway. One lady has to go out and get a no-rise every time. If she was to replace her roof, that's a permit, that's a no-rise. If she's to do her siding, it's a permit and a no-rise. She's do damage repair after a flood, it's a permit and a no-rise.
Which is costing her additional.
which is
money.
costing her between $500 to $1,500 each time because she knows the engineer. But you compound that, we try to figure out how to dry flood-proof a building, 10, 15,000. So.
So you guys on this sheet, you're just saying, summarize like floodplain versus floodway, I guess, or is that what you're trying to do? So both of them are not great things to be developing in, but you're saying if you get on the floodplain, if you have a structure, there are limitations on how many times you can repair the structure, and that's what you're saying with this 10-year deal and 50%. So without getting into all the details, you got an issue there, but you're saying you have the same requirements with floodway plus more permitting.
Correct. But the importance of the 50.1 is everyone has probably pretty much used their 50% with the past 2 floods plus 3 flash floods.
Okay.
So the next event will likely trigger a lot of need to stay compliant with the NFIP of additional expenses that those landowners are gonna have to incur to stay compliant.
Okay.
Or John will be able to give them a permit.
And the other important thing with the NFIP and what Karen was saying about the probation and suspension, once the community gets put on suspension, not only do your federally backed mortgages stop, your access to disaster relief stops. All your federal funding stops. You cannot get any federal backing for anything while you're in suspension of the National Flood Insurance Program.
So we take it, so John takes it very seriously. It's to the benefit of the city for John to keep all of the records and to follow the letter of the NFIP. So going back to the letter, it's a very good letter.
And a floodway is always in a floodplain, but a floodplain is not in a floodway, correct?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
And so that kind of goes to the next page of what are the impacts to properties located in floodways. So we kind of alluded to an increase in premiums because you have a higher risk of flood loss because you're in a velocity area. Generally, you could have an impact to your appraisal value. Certainly if it would change from a floodplain to a floodway during a remapping. And then we've talked about this previously, improvements on properties in a floodway require additional engineering and your no-rise certificate. And the last page, okay. I skipped it. I went the wrong way. Sorry. So then I'm on the what if page. What if in the Old Town area, everything that is mapped in blue becomes a floodway? So you can see the lagoon in the blue area. If you need any improvements to the lagoon, would a no-rise be able to achieve? Could an engineering analysis be completed to get a no-rise so that we could do the improvements to the lagoon? Obviously, everyone wants the lagoon to keep going. It's a necessity. But then you look at the properties south of Truett Drive. If that became a floodway, anything that they would want to do on their property that was above the existing ground surface would require an engineering analysis. And likewise in the Old Town area, anyone that wanted to do anything to their property would require the additional cost and expense of getting the no-rise if the engineering analysis could demonstrate that there actually was a no-rise as a result of their improvements. So then let's go to the last page. What are the effects of a smaller floodway surcharge? So right now, the ordinance has a 12-inch, 1-foot surcharge. So that means we're able to
what the way and the engineering way of floodway is determined is you take the sides of the creek and you keep moving that flow, the ability to flow that water in until you get that 1 foot change in what flood elevation. So that's why you get a narrower floodway. But if you change it to a 1 inch, effectively, everything that is floodplain would be floodway. It's over 90%, 1 inch to 1 foot. And so, so changing to a 1 inch surcharge, you'd have a larger area that's mapped as floodway, and they would be subject to the additional redevelopment regulations. It could be considered a taking, since it would be changed, a change from the current mapping. And it could open the city to potential litigation. You could likely alienate Old Town properties. And if they decided not to improve their properties, or if they get above that 51%, opening it up to a blight scenario if they refuse to comply. And then this last one, we talked about the wastewater treatment lagoon. And then we get to the last one, if it could hinder the ability of the city to construct a levee to protect against Merrimack River backwater flowing up Fifi, Forby, and Flat Creek. And so that could possibly restrict continuing along those study lines to provide that type of flood protection. And the last picture is just a full-size version of that FEMA letter, so that you don't have to split. But
Is that your presentation?
that's my presentation.
That was probably the most fun presentation. So I don't, if one of you guys start asking questions, do whatever. I mean, there's 1,000 things in here, so, I got a couple questions, but whoever wants to go. I mean, you're the one that asked for it, so you want, or whoever wants to go.
So there's no benefit to moving out from the floodplain to the floodway? Doesn't sound like as much of a benefit.
You mean changing from 12 to 1?
No, well, no.
Making the floodway larger?
Right, and moving what was in a floodplain into a floodway.
Correct.
There's no benefit.
There's very little
That
benefit.
seems odd, but, so, sure, thanks.
So just, I guess just to clarify, so by reducing the available rise from 12-inch base flood. So base flood right now, elevation is based off of like the 100-year?
Base flood is 100 years.
100 years. So basically, if somebody's within a 100-year floodplain right now, they could develop on their property, they could fill in their property, do whatever, as long as they don't create a rise greater than 12 inches of flood, correct?
Correct.
So what we're saying is, or what you're saying, if I'm understanding correctly, I'm just trying to understand this because I'm not 100% on all this, obviously. So by saying a property you can't do anything on your property if it's going to create a rise of more than 1 inch or 1/10 of a foot, whatever it may be, we're actually reducing the fill other places, correct? Like the flood other places, is that correct or no?
No.
No, it's not, okay. So in a 1 inch, like if a 1 inch location was actually implemented for a larger region, such as like St. Louis County or throughout the entire Merrimack watershed, could that result in future, in less future flood damage?
I'm gonna say no, because the current mapping and the current regulations have allowed landowners to develop under the 12-inch rise rule. And just by changing to a 1 inch rise now, is not gonna get those people who are currently okay with, in the 12-inch, in the 1 foot area, they're still gonna be there. You're not gonna be able to get rid of the properties.
Right, I'm talking about future properties, like future development on those properties.
But what I'm saying is you're gonna have a mishmash of regulations, and really the change does not benefit anyone here in the city. It would benefit maybe people upstream. And it's highly dependent on land use and rate of development.
Okay, so just to clarify, if it was implemented for like all of St. Louis County or the entire Merrimack watershed, you said that it wouldn't result in less.
I'm saying that that's not a possibility.
Okay,
It wouldn't be implemented,
okay. It would,
because it would be considered a taking by a lot of properties.
okay. So it wouldn't it be implemented or it wouldn't result in less future flood damage?
I'm not answering that question.
What about if a 1 inch rise limitation was in place? Would it affect the amount of flood water that a certain development would be allowed to displace compared to the 1 foot standard?
Yes.
It would. Okay, so that would result in less water displacement. Okay, and then,
But it's, I have to caution you, because where the city is at in relation to the whole watershed, you're at the very bottom of the Merrimack River watershed. So even if a small area, even if it's 100 acres is filled, what is that 100 acres in comparison to the hundreds of square miles tributary to you? You would like to think that this small postage stamp is gonna improve things for the whole watershed, when it doesn't.
right, but if
Because of the
they,
timing.
but if
of
the
the
entire
hydrograph.
watershed then made this change ultimately, then that would be better for us, correct?
No,
No,
it would be beneficial, your change would only benefit anyone upstream of you. It would not benefit the city. And in fact, if that was done, you would still, you'd be alienating any existing development that you would have. Say anyone on Truett Drive,
right,
they've had to strip out their offices and rebuild twice. With a change to a floodway for a property on Truett Drive,
Mhm.
they likely could not do it without dry flood proofing. They may just leave. They may just say, you know what, I've done this twice, I'm done.
so then if, okay, so I have questions about that too, but, I'm talking about the rising base flood elevation, just trying to understand this. So since we're at the bottom of the Merrimack watershed, if the entire watershed, let's just say that something miraculous were to happen and we were able to, the entire watershed, the BFE was changed from, or the allowable rise and that was changed from 12 inches down to 1 inch. Would that, since we're at the bottom, does that affect us? Because their water, are you saying like their water's coming to us or?
You're not changing the amount of water that's coming to you.
Right, the displacement, correct?
No.
Or no? Okay, I'm so sorry, I'm trying here. I'm just trying to understand, so. Okay,
Probably could I ask one question?
Sure. Yeah.
I'm just trying to get a big picture because we do it, like we do these live streams now and stuff, and if we still have anybody that's made it through your presentation, I wanted to try and get it back. So I'm looking at the one map you have, it says what if. I'm just trying to boil it down. So if I'm understanding you right, I got 3 lines, I got a floodway on it. The floodway is basically, if you're saying that, you're basically saying floodway is an area that's already defined by the 1 inch rise. You basically can't do anything in there, you gotta get a no rise permit, but no rise technically means 1 inch.
No,
Or I
a
thought-
no rise means 0.0.
So 0, so it's actually more, okay. That's what you're saying is if you were to say, okay, I want to change Eureka's ordinance and change it to a 1 inch instead of a 12-inch or you're saying effectively, it makes that blue area that has the sewer treatment plant, Truett, downtown, it turns, you basically have to, John has to regulate that as if it's floodway.
Yes,
Okay, so for our purposes in town, like if somebody downtown goes in and says, I wanna, regardless, the 50 thing, I think is true either way. But you're just saying there's another layer of regulation on that because they'd have to go through and get no rise certificates. Like if I wanna have, Odell's wants to change siding or Joe Bacardi's needs to do basement work or something like that. Every time somebody does something from a regulatory purpose, you're saying there's an additional regulatory cost to having to do that because now they're in floodplain now. And so they've got all this other burden and potentially, if I'm understanding right, too, because doesn't floodway have a higher risk of flood, so the insurance rates would go up.
and you will go to a higher rate table.
So and then for us, so that's like private people, but then like the city sitting in the sewer treatment plant, I mean, that would affect us trying to do repairs or updates.
Yes, you
And
would
then
be.
Truett, if you're throwing them in, that's all that industrial part, so same deal what we do. So you're saying the practical effect is, it would have, and again, if you're in, maybe this would get more to Carlene's issues, like if you were setting it up from scratch, you could do something where you could say, I could do this and it would keep people farther away, but our problem is, we have a lot of people that are in this floodplain now, and if we up the restrictions on them, we're basically really putting a big burden on people that are already in a situation that they can't get out of. And we're not, from what I'm seeing on your maps, I'm not seeing a big gain, or what you guys are talking about, there's not flood protection here. It's picked up, it's something that, it may help, I guess it would help somebody in Pacific maybe at some point, if once these buildings were removed, basically.
Once the buildings were removed.
So, but I guess that's all I'm getting to is, I'm just saying I'm just trying to get real practical because I feel like our job is to take care of Eureka at this particular place. And that's all I'm trying to figure out is, you're just saying this, I haven't heard, I just want to make sure that am I reading what you're giving?
You're reading what,
That kind of
yes.
scares me.
So the blue would become floodway, and it would be subject to the additional regulatory burden of the no rise, of showing whatever they're gonna do on their property shows a 0.00 change in 100-year water surface elevation.
But you're saying that's how you enforce it in order to keep all our FEMA funding and all of our, all that other stuff.
Well, that also will affect the finance, if somebody down there needs to refinance their loan in floodway, John, and that would affect their rate and their ability to get the financing.
And I like to point out too that the flood insurance, even though they would be able to buy flood insurance in the floodway, it would be significantly more than it was in the floodplain. Probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 3, 4, 5 times what they're paying now.
So I guess my question, does anybody know like how in states that have implemented, reduced from the 12-inch to the allowable 1-inch or 1/10 of an inch rise, like how do they handle situations like this, do you know?
Generally, if we want to use the state of Illinois as an example, they have a 1-inch rise. It was from the inception of their participation in NFIP.
How long is that, you think?
It's probably been 40 years ago, 30 years ago.
30 years ago or so, is what you said, I'm sorry.
30, 40 years ago, yeah.
And
So it
then,
wasn't a change, they adopted it as a 1-inch.
they adopted it
surcharge.
30 years ago,
Correct.
before they were a part of the NFIP.
When they came into the program. It didn't change from a 12-inch to a 1-inch. It has always been.
Always been the 1-inch. Okay. Okay. I guess the only other question that I really, let's see here. So I guess when somebody does have the 1-inch instead of the 12-inch, states, such as Illinois, or not, have they realized less additional flood damage and a reduction in flood insurance rates and perhaps taxpayer savings?
I can't answer that.
No, okay. Okay.
I would ask what their expenditures were for buying out the properties.
It does, and to that point, to close out the presentation, or the statement on the front page is that the floodway concept does have to balance private property rights with an increased flood risk hazard. It's a tool that is used in land use planning.
So right now, property owners in Old Town and Truett Drive, they could sell their property if they didn't want to continue to deal with the flood. But if we instituted something like this, that would be basically impossible to sell.
It would likely reduce their fair market value and their ability to sell the property.
I have a question. If FEMA changes the maps and what was floodplain became floodway, would they still be, subject to the restrictions and the no rise?
Anything in a floodway is subject to a no rise requirement.
But they are actually revising the maps now. They're all down, would you say like we're around 4 or 5 foot right now?
Yeah, so what I did, this is all dealing with the current existing maps. SEMA has restudied the entire Merrimack River watershed. And in Eureka, the 100-year water surface elevation is going to increase between 4 and 5 feet, which I think you've all experienced in the 15 and 17 events. It's kind of validating what has been experienced. So all of these landowners that you see in blue and in orange are likely going to get a little bit deeper in their depth of flooding.
So what sort of things cause the additional flooding? What sort of things would cause that rise?
Additional development in the watershed, change in rate of rainfall, change in land use if there's been any clearing or development.
So, okay. So we could realize this becoming floodway anyway, or at least portions of it becoming floodway anyway, if they're redoing the maps and additional development and et cetera in the watershed anyway, right?
They have preliminary maps out there that have looked at not only the floodplain location and extent, they will also be updating the floodway.
So it could result in this being floodway,
No, there's not been that report saying.
possibly.
I haven't seen any Woods thing saying they're gonna make downtown floodway.
No, but the biggest change will be on the
No
Merrimack.
news.
So right now, your floodway with the Merrimack all gets under the bridge over the 44 bridge. Right now, the new map will show the floodway that extends all the way over to the railroad,
That'll all be floodway?
all floodway. It's a significant change,
Like you're 66.
and it'll impact properties like Midwest Motors, and people in that area. They will move from floodplain to floodway.
So over time, basically, it's just gonna get worse, pretty much, right? I mean, is that pretty much where we are?
Well, not if we fix it with levees like we're working on right now.
So if you would protect Old Town from the backup of the Merrimack River, which again, you're gonna see a 4-foot increase in the flood depth, flood elevation. It's gonna back up even further into the downtown area and deeper into the Old Town area. Then you would remove that source of flooding, and your only source then would be from rainfall in this much smaller watershed. And so the goal is to construct that levee, keep the Merrimack River out, and you would just deal with the rainfall that fell here when the Merrimack is in flood and you pump it over the levee. And then that will greatly reduce the the flood elevations in Old Town and along Truett.
But does it matter, to the mapping? If we have a levee, would those areas then remain floodplain?
There's a process where we would remap the area. We call it a LOMR, a letter of map change. And then that will change the blue area
Right.
to an unshaded zone.
Mhm.
And then those properties would actually go in a different direction for the rate premium. Instead of getting more expensive, they get a preferred rate.
Is that where the CRS comes in?
The CRS is a program, if the city participates in it, can get percentage reductions to anyone that owns flood insurance. So if you have like a rating of, I think, 2, 9, I don't remember which way it is, but for every one that you get in your CRS rating, policyholders get a 10% reduction in the premium. Now, it's onerous, but yeah. Participation in CRS is always recommended.
It's always recommended.
It's a lot of work. It's more than what probably John Boggs has
Yes,
time to do. But it's something that I would recommend that the county, there's a framework, and that if the cities can buy into a framework, then otherwise you're redoing, each community is redoing the same thing. And that's
So
onerous.
just out of curiosity, so since we're at the bottom of the watershed and we do those levees, then being at the bottom, I guess, who has the immediate impact of that water that's no longer able to, or the area that's displaced, basically?
We're outside of the floodway, so we would not be displacing the water where it would negatively impact anyone.
So when doing the levee, is that, is the levee required to not change a rise any greater than 12 inches, just like everything else
Yes.
is?
For the Merrimack River, yes.
That's the report that we forwarded over to,
Right.
and showed the analysis on that, so that's what was shown, was not impacting the 12-inch rise. So she's
Right.
done that analysis on those locations.
Yeah. I'm just asking the question for everybody too, just to clarify. And then, so no greater than 12 inches.
A similar situation happened with elk trails and protective.
Yeah, so for Corby Creek, Clifton Creek, the construction of that levee would help the high school and elk trails and keep the water from the Merrimack from backing in.
Keep 109 open.
And keep 109 open.
So where does that water go then? Like where does that water go then?
Just stays in the river,
Holds it,
it holds the
yeah,
river
holds
back.
it back from going into downtown or elk trail subdivision.
So, you know what I'm saying, like when the river rises, doesn't it then spread more? Do you see,
And that's why
does that
you
make sense? Like when it spreads and rises, correct? So I guess that's my question is, that water, like where's it going? If we're keeping it out of, say, this area here, does that impact all the areas around it more? You know what I mean? Like, does
It's
that,
a holding tank for the water.
No, so the floodway,
okay,
that's where you're creating the rise.
right,
So without getting uber complicated,
Oh, what's
Water.
that now?
the water is in that 1 foot surcharge. Is in your 1 foot rise.
I'm just gonna remain confused, but okay, thank you.
It disappears.
All right, guys, we gotta keep moving the business,
Yeah, no, that's
so
great.
Karen, thank you.
Excellent.
Thank you
Thank
so
you so
much.
much.
Appreciate it.
I appreciate it.
All right, we got,
Thank you,
on
John.
to John's, great job in the water. Okay, so we're going into, the recommendations from December 11th, 2019. So we had a recommended approval, from St. John's for suggestion special use permit. Wes, do you have any comment from that meeting? Does anybody want a presentation, or do they want questions or whatever? So I'll leave it to you.
It went very smoothly at P and D. There's nobody against it. Everybody was 100% for it, so. And I don't see any reason why they wouldn't approve it, so.
I'll make a motion to approve with PT's recommendation.
With this basis.
Right.
As per P and Z's recommendations.
Make that motion.
Second.
All right, we got a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Move on. We had a recommended denial of the McDonald's USA petition or special use permit. So there's Craig had sent us some information on that. They said we're talking about having a motion, or do you have a motion?
I'll make a motion that we move back to P and D for their report.
Second.
Does anybody have any questions on that? All right, so a motion and a second, all in favor?
Aye.
Anybody opposed? All right, so last time for report, we should get that back up before the next meeting. All right, and then we have bill number 2634, and just as a clarification, this would only deal with windswept. All right, so we're gonna this would be a cleanup of windswept in Ward 2.
My only thing was
That's everybody in the
that we continue to look at adjusting the wards in a timely manner next month or two.
Kathy, we were talking about getting a memo out about the ward, like the review of the ward boundaries and stuff. What do you think on reasonable time to get that up to the first thing? You could piggyback on that next meeting. So she's gonna have that next meeting, and we can start setting some on that. But the idea would be to have the rule book for it. So everybody's out and you can work on that.
In reference to the redistricting the entire city, I think what we need to do possibly is wait until we get our bridge done over in the Allenton area, because if that particular area becomes maybe another ward, I don't know.
Yeah, let's do this.
So I don't know
You guys
if we
are gonna
wanna-
have, I hate to open it because we got a lot of time of that. He's got strong feelings on it.
We
You
can
guys
do this
oughta-
one now, but
Right, but I'm saying, I think she needs to get us, we had talked about like getting at least getting the rule book out and go. I think it'd be great. You guys ought to talk about that offline, because we have plenty of time to do it. And then, but I want to get that in, and then that would be part of the debate too. Timing, all that stuff needs to get on the table.
It's been going on for a long time. That Ward 2 has very few people compared to Ward 1 and Ward 3. And we need to adjust it, and by some simple calculations, I think we can come up with either adjustment of the wards or by making an extra ward if we need to. And we can always down the road in 10 years from now, readjust the wards again, but we should do it on a timely basis. We got a census in 2020. It's a good time, to look at that.
All right, well, we're pledging to argue with each other again. And we'll do that shortly. Do we have a motion though?
I move that we read bill number 2634 for the first time by short title.
I'll second it.
They came back together.
All right, we got, that was a motion, second, all in favor?
Aye.
Anybody opposed?
In order to amend the municipal code related to Ward 2 boundaries.
I make a motion, we read bill 2634 for the second time by short title.
Second.
Okay, motion, second, all in favor?
Aye.
Anybody opposed?
In order to amend the municipal code related to Ward 2 boundaries.
I move we read bill number 2634 for the third time by short title.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Anybody opposed?
In order to amend the municipal code related to Ward 2 boundaries.
I move we adopt bill number 2634 by roll call vote.
Second.
Alderman Kiefer,
Yes.
Barry,
Yes.
Murray. Yes. Swayze.
Yes.
Stark.
Yes.
All right, bill number 2634, repair ordinance 2523. Days. Jumps on us. That's what happens if we don't do what you say. So, all right, we've got the bill on here for authorizing the agreement to enter into construction of mountain bike park. I do have, I think Brett's here, I guess, all right, so actually the guy from on that. If you guys had questions or if you want to make a conversation or make a motion, it's your meeting.
I'll make a motion that we rebuild 2635 for the first time by,
It's 38, I'm sorry, Wes, we did that all.
38?
Yeah.
Okay, 2638 for the first time, a short title.
Second.
All right, we got a motion in 2 seconds. All those in favor?
Aye.
Anybody opposed?
An ordinance authorizing entering into an agreement with Nomad Trails Development LLC for the construction of a mountain bike park.
I make the motion to rebuild number 2638 by second time by short time.
Second. Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Anybody opposed?
An ordinance authorizing entering into an agreement with Nomad Trails Development LLC for the construction of a mountain bike park.
I move bill number 2638 for the third time by short title.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Anybody opposed?
An ordinance authorizing entering into an agreement with Nomad Trails Development LLC for the construction of a mountain bike park.
I move that we adopt Bill 2638 into ordinance by roll call vote.
Second.
Alderman Kiefer,
Yes.
Barry,
Yes.
Ms. Freeze,
Yes.
Murray, yes, sorry.
Absolutely.
No, that's.
25.
Bill number 2638 becomes ordinance number 2524. All right, we're on to ESA. You got a bill in there, ready to let me know, discuss, or you want?
No, I talked to.
I'm sorry, I do want to discuss, and actually, there's a parent here, if, you feel comfortable, basically asking us some questions regarding, leasing out our fields, and whatnot. Is this something that?
Well,
you just will,
I mean-
make a motion.
Yeah, I mean, we normally, I would say, like, any of that stuff, too, like, if they wanted to guess or whatever, but on that, I'm not gonna hold them back. We can keep it a couple, it's pretty short.
Pretty short? Or is it you?
But we got a
Yeah,
minute to, we got a minute to do, which is fine. I just don't want to get.
So- Okay, well, yeah, I mean, I guess, let me just ask,
Sure.
You need a motion and a second first, and then you can discuss.
okay, I make a motion that we discuss.
But we gotta make a motion,
Okay.
do we have a motion to approve?
I'll make a motion that we read Bill 2639 for the first time by short title.
Second.
All right,
Now we can
Discuss.
discuss. So in regards to us, leasing out our fields, I guess the question that was presented is, what is our goal in leasing them out to ESA?
Say
Like,
that
what,
again.
what is the goal? What is the goal for our fields? What is, as a city, what is the goal for those fields to be used for?
Organized baseball, soccer, different organizations. Eureka Sports Association's been around for a long time, and they've managed the fields for a long time. And I think that's what they're,
I mean, do you
So is
have
it for
what's your?
I guess recreational, I've been presented with some questions, which I do.
No, I mean, I'm just like,
I
if
do-
you're on the board, like, when you're saying,
Oh.
I'm just asking you. I mean,
Mine's for recreational purposes. I mean, like, that's what I think that the kids should be able to use it for recreational purposes, and that's why I choose, to have an organization, not necessarily ESA or not necessarily CYC, but it's more of like a recreational, event. And I just wanted to see if everybody else was kind of on the same page or.
So it's kind of like it's a city park, but nobody can use it for the ESA.
yeah, they're the ones that organize the
Kind of-
teams that
Yeah.
get the participation.
It's kind of onerous.
Yeah.
But they do pay the city
Yeah,
to use it, and the city in turn maintains it.
and in the past, I
So it's
don't
not
think,
exclusive, you
It's
understand?
priority use, not exclusive use.
Correct. But they lease it
They
from
lease it.
9 to 5.
so in the past, we never got anything, and we worked out a lease agreement so that we get some compensation for the sports organizations to organize sports teams and play on these fields, which is the purpose of recreation. So that's, if you got baseball fields and you got soccer fields that people want to play on, and these people organize those sports teams.
So I guess my question is for Craig that I posed earlier regarding the approximate maintenance cost of the fields each year. Approximately, this doesn't include labor, right? Doesn't include any of that. is greater than what we receive from ESA. So I guess that's, that's one thing. And then a second thing is whether or not it is a, we have no like regulatory, we lease it out to them or rent that out to them and for them to run it however they want. Please correct me if I'm butchering this here.
You're talking about running their program?
Right, and if we're leasing it out to say, hey, this is a recreational thing, this is recreational, or is it select, or, you know what I mean? Like that kind of, can we have something like that rather than, something like that in there rather than just saying, hey, you guys go about it and, and then they're running a select team or a select, and basically outplaying these little kids who are doing it for recreational
We don't have
purposes.
select teams. These are groups of people that are in our community. Both my kids
My kids.
went through the soccer and the softball and the baseball 40 years ago, all right? So, I mean, the thing is that these are our residents, our kids, that they have sponsors that put together teams to play. I don't know that there are any select teams that utilize
No,
our
so-
fields here.
I
So
would think- I
everybody,
would think that would be something that would be in ESA bylaws.
right,
You know what I mean, rather than
not
having
having select
agreement
teams.
to rent the field. is
So
that-
I guess my confusion is if a kid signs up, say, for softball, and then they don't have a team to play for, and they're coming in saying, hey, I want to play on a team. Well, there's teams who have already organized, they already have their select players, and therefore that kid who's wanting to come play has no team to play on, rather than it being like a lottery or like you know what I mean, rather than,
But how, okay, so you're making the fields available for the sports association in town.
Mhm.
And the questions you're getting to sound like, sort of what Marie's saying, is you don't like how, or somebody doesn't like how ESA is running that.
Right.
That's not something we can build into the contract unless we want to take over ESA. Which I don't
You have to hire
think is,
people.
so there's nothing that we can put in a contract about, requiring say a raffle or something,
but how would you do that, and also why would they accept that? I mean, because if they're organizing their league, they obviously think they're doing it in the best way for the majority of the children that are participating in that program.
I could jump in on two things. I met with Phil and those guys down at ESA like twice this year, going over to stuff with fields. I think we've got kind of a goofy situation in that, like, they were going through, like, some sports associations are, they're either run by the city completely, some lease, and then there's some that are completely private and they're on their own private property. So like Pine would be on its own private property, runs its own deal. Chesterfield is a city one, and they're on city property and they're run by the city league, and I think they have people that are involved, and then you get like Ballin and Manchester in the middle. I can say right now, I think ESA in general is one of the most I think there ought to be a ton more attention from us about how to make that, how to cooperate with them and make it a better program. And I think the more fields, the more access to them up, because I think one of the biggest assets we have in the area is we have a ton of kids. I mean, if you look at the Arbors over there, the Hilltop, and when I was talking to these other guys in these other leagues, you go up to Manchester, you go up to Ballin, or whatever, they're not areas that are growing with this many kids. So I think it's a core function of the city and the board to try and provide as many options, as many of those type of things out there as you can. And what I found frustrating the last 10 or 15 years, my kids were older now, but they spent a ton of time driving other places to play soccer, baseball, whatever. So I'm not necessarily interested in necessarily managing each of their decisions, but I think the more kids you have in the program, the more likely you are to have opportunities for all different skill levels because there's more kids. And that's been problems they've had, is if the leagues are not competitive enough, then they end up, having one team get hammered by another team because there's
That's
not
what's
enough kids.
happening.
I know, because there's not enough kids in the league, and we're losing kids to all sorts of other league, like, we're under supporting them. And I think the whole thing ought to be looked at, but I just think it's important out of here. I think people need to understand that, I mean, ESA, to me, I mean, we ought to be I don't want to get the impression that the board is not interested in ESA, the athletics program from the city being really well done, good fields, good stuff going on.
Absolutely.
Because that has to be, it's a huge deal for a ton of these guys, and I think we ought to be concentrating on how to provide more opportunities for those guys, so they spend more time in practice than they do in the car, trying to get to practice. And that to me has been I hated that, because the fields are crowded or whatever, so, but I get it, there's other private organizations that do stuff, so I just think a priority here, I don't have a problem with, because again, if we don't sign this contract and we don't give them priority, you'll see, if you wanna talk about even more people leaving, they won't have anywhere to play, and these other, we just got them in, and I met with those guys, we just got them into the ball in Manchester, the better baseball league of their time, and where they're gonna play in all these good facilities everywhere, but I pretty much told them, I mean, the city is backing the sports association, we're gonna be behind them, we'll make sure they've got assets. If we don't, we have to be for that group, or I think we're doing a real disservice to the bigger population. I'm not saying that's what you're
Well,
saying.
right.
I just think we need to look at the whole lot, I think the whole thing ought to be looked at more than just the lease. If that was-
Absolutely.
And I think that would be a continuing conversation, I think we could gain, and again, it would be like, how can we provide some more space?
So, and I guess let me give this a little bit of context here is, I had received a forwarded letter to a first grade team on what the expectations were for those kids. First grade, that's 7-year-olds maybe. And the requirements and the things that coach was saying that was required of those kids, and if they didn't like it, they were gonna go to the next kid on their wait list. To me, that's a select team. You're saying, this is what I'm doing, this is what we're doing, and this is what we're going, and if you don't like it, see you later, bye. We're gonna go to the next person on the list. To me, that's not okay for somebody who we're subsidizing that we're subsidizing on our fields.
But that's a coach versus an entire organization. That's one coach's policy to be on that coach's team.
There's a lot of.
Yeah, but we're talking about a lease for the field to make it available, and that's I think a separate discussion.
What if we did it out of here though, because like I said, I think we had a big part, but I think everybody thinks it's an important thing to look at, they may all have different ideas. But I'm thinking that, in short term, I think the lease is, I don't think we have time to adjust something before we do their lease, because they gotta plan on next season. But I'd be more than happy to follow up with this, it's more meeting time or
That would be
ideas on
great.
things we can do. Let's address it beyond the lease,
And
because I think that's,
Is that
everybody's got points.
something that we can get feedback from some parents who've gone through the organization.
I've got Phil and those guys they'd be thrilled to come up here. Because from their point of view, I'll be honest, a lot of the ESA guys are like, we don't pay any attention. They'll give us comments on different things they wanna do in the fields or different things they wanna do. And there's not a whole lot of communication back and forth, so I think I know the leadership up there would welcome the opportunity to do some stuff with us and be more, not less. They're not looking to just lease and never see us.
And can we also invite other
You can invite
parents?
anybody can come on the guest
Coaches
period.
or, okay.
That's what I'm saying, like I give them time or whatever. The more, any of that stuff, like I said, everybody wants to talk. Well, let's get this thing off we got a motion.
I'll make a motion that we rebuild 2639 for the second time.
Second.
Did we do it for the first time?
Well, we did, but we didn't read it the first time.
We didn't vote on it.
Okay.
We just got a motion and a second, we didn't vote. So
Yeah, we didn't.
all in favor of the, aye. Anybody opposed?
An ordinance authorizing entering into an athletic fields lease agreement with the Eureka Sports Association.
Okay, now I'll make a motion to rebuild 2639 for the second time.
Second.
Short time.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Anybody opposed?
An ordinance authorizing entering into an athletic fields lease agreement with the Eureka Sports Association.
I move we bill number 2639 for the third time in short time.
Second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Anybody opposed?
An ordinance authorizing entering into an athletic fields lease agreement with the Eureka Sports Association.
I move we adopt bill number 2639 by roll call vote.
Alderman Kiefer,
Yes.
Barry,
Yes.
Ms. Greasy,
Yes.
Murray, yes, sorry.
Yes.
All right, so that's, bill number 2639 with our ordinance number 2525. All right. We have the bills up for approval.
There's no make a motion to approve.
All right. We have a motion and a second, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? We have a motion for, curry bills, questions or motion?
I'll make a motion to approve.
Second.
We have a motion and a second, all in favor?
Aye.
Anybody opposed? All right, we need to acknowledge receipt of the financial statements for the period ending November 30th.
Acknowledge.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Go down to mayor, alderman, and staff comments and reports. I have nothing.
I just want to commend our public works for doing the excellent job that they've done in the last couple of days on the clearing the streets, because once again, people can get anywhere they want in the city of Eureka, but once they get out of here, they can't go.
Why would you ever want to leave?
Well, you don't. I mean, the thing is this, you know, those guys do a tremendous job, and I just want to commend them on that.
I was serious.
Some of us have jobs also.
I work from home.
What we got? You got anything? All right, you got anything?
I'm talking about.
Okay. I'll wait on everything. All right, that's, we have a call for close by anybody. So moved. I've got a closed session starting up. See you guys.
Hey, George,
can you check the, it looks like there's like a, no, it's on there. Yeah, it's out there. You gotta put-
I'm West.
Talking about water.